They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Rafal, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. A All Hallows Eve edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast, released on the 29th of October. So you got some time to listen to this before Halloween. Well, I'm going to title this one Scary Stories to Tell Around the Server Room Light. And we've got some good ones for you guys. We've got some, we figured we'd have a little bit of fun with this. I'm sure everybody has a good story from the time you accidentally RM minus RF'd the root drive to you know, maybe some issues you did that broke everything for a while. On this show we have Mr. Jim Tiller. Hello, Mr. Spooky.
Hey, I showed up as a farmer Jim today, as James pointed out.
A proper scarecrow, if you will.
Yes,
I like it.
James is showing up as an IT guy.
Yeah, showing up. Listen, I usually have a regular shirt on. I put the polo on, so I dressed up.
Yeah, that's right.
We all stretch.
And I'm using I've got a mat. My kids made this, and this is awesome. My daughter made this one. This is my Halloween mask this year. I think it's pretty cool.
Scary.
Yeah, that's that. So
I like how it's got the voice changer too. That sounds like it's from an echo chamber. It's it just adds to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Do I sound different when I talk to this mask? Ah. It feels like one of those. What was it? The movie The Mask with Jim Carrey. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Although that totally went on his face 100%. Unlike like Jason's mask, that was just the hockey mask on there.
I've even got my spooky pumpkin buddy here hanging out with me.
There he is.
Spooky pumpkin judging you right now. All right. So who wants to go first? Because I've got some, but who wants to go first and tell a spooky Halloween story or a spooky story? James, I think you should go first.
Listen. I will go first. It's funny you didn't tell us about this, so we get on here. So I had to come up with this on the spot. I
things on my co-host.
It's every episode. So
shots fired.
I love the shock on Raph's face. So this is funny. Basically, when I first started out, before I got into security, I was doing development work and I was consulting for a company, working on some stuff. And they felt like they had somebody that was getting into their network. I mean, this was a long time ago. And so they tasked me with, hey, can you try to figure out how they're getting in? So I'm like, all right. I grabbed the hacker handbook. I started going through it, doing all the stuff that was in there. And, in the end, I figured out they had 2 NICs actually exposed and 1 was not protected. But so we figured out what was going on. But in the process of this was me learning security. And this is the warning we give to everybody. It's not about the tools. It's about how you know how to use the tools. I went and the book said to use Brutus to brute force passwords. So I'm like, yeah, this seems like a good idea. So I'm sitting at my cube. I fire up Brutus and I'm like, I'm going to try this. Let's see. I run, I dump all the names because I did user to SID, SID to user, all that stuff. I had all these usernames. I dump them in there. I let it run. And then a little bit later, I hear the 2 network admins who sit right outside my cube in a bigger cube talking about they don't understand why everybody's locked out. The CEO's locked out. All these people are reporting they're locked out of their systems. And they're just baffled. And I knew right away. By the way, Brutus defaults to 5 attempts. We locked out after 3. So lesson learned on using, know your tools, right? This was a good lesson to learn. So I'm shrinking down into my chair, like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Like, do I tell him I did this? Do I not tell him I did this? Let him just work through it. And, but I did end up letting them know. I mean, they did task me with trying to find this stuff out. So it's kind of, a little bit.
Did that.
Be careful what you ask for, right?
Yeah. Like that. I mean, they were able to unlock everybody, so it was fine. But yeah, it was a good lesson about really understanding what you're doing when you're, going up against a production environment. But that was definitely a big, like, oops, maybe I shouldn't have done all that. Yeah.
I'm just picturing you like just sliding lower and lower in your chair like this. You just
kind of slithering down. It's like my spine turned to jelly, and I just kind of like flattened out and down and under the desk. Like, oh, that wasn't me.
Yikes!
I think that sinking feeling is what is that real horror story I think that you're looking for, Raf. I think for me, the one that came up immediately in my head is when I was first getting into security. We all did pen testing or some variation of it back when we made the wheel kind of thing. And it came time for my first, shall we say, real test, right? I mean, I just got a job at this company, and my boss was like, "Hey, time for you to pen test. You're our guy. Let's tear it up." So I was all about whatever I got to do, I got to win. I got to find something, that sort of like you really got to push hard. So I start just hacking away, right? I know got the statement of work. I know what my limitations are. I know where to go. And I start doing things, and I bump into a router and find a way onto the router, and I find an interface. I'm like, wait a second, this is kind of like a serial interface. And I get through that and find out that I'm connected to another router through one of those, remember those old Cisco blue serial cables? You guys remember those that you would do for command? Yeah. Okay. Well, somebody had bridged one into another router that apparently was somehow connected to other routers. So I'm like, hey, this is awesome. We're just going to keep going from router to router and see what I can get to. And maybe I can find my way into some dark crevice and cause problems. So I'm turning on everything. I'm running every command you can imagine in this network and looking around. And all of a sudden, this gets really hard for me because it's going through so many hops. My command prompt's slowing down. So I'm just like, you know what? Turn everything on, hack away, knock yourself out crazy. Meanwhile, I didn't realize that I had gone right through their network, popped out into an entirely different company.
Whoops.
That was much bigger. So all of a sudden, I find myself going from company A to company B, and I'm trying to politely back out of this thing. Meanwhile, their routers are crashing, and I can tell they're trying to kick me out of the environment. And right about then, you have that sinking feeling like they're going to know it's me. they're absolutely going to know it's me. They're going to come get me. Somebody's going to knock on the door any minute now. But yeah, let's just say that was a teachable moment, I think is the best way to say it, right? Went too far, a little too aggressive, and found myself downing the wrong organization, which is never a good thing.
So I've got one for you. It's again that like you get that sinking feeling where you're like, oh God, am I going to get fired? Wait, am I going to get prosecuted? Am I ever going to? Can I walk out of this building? So back a long time ago, early in my career, I worked for a large global company in a power gen, monitoring power gen facilities and stuff like that. And speaking of undead, the end of NT4's life, for those of you old enough to remember NT4 on floppies, had come and gone, and we had paid Microsoft and for the extended support, but we had like 3 months left or something. And somebody tasked me, a contractor, with the job of identifying all the NT4 systems on a network that we could find, categorizing them, finding their owners, and then going and doing something about it, putting them on some sort of plan to decommission. I mean, sounds easy enough, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, I got a list of IP addresses on a spreadsheet, as one would. I got lists of IP addresses that should be excluded, as one would, because there are brittle things on these networks in the early 2000s. 24 years ago. Yikes. Man, if this story was a person that could legally drink, that's crazy. So I fired up Nmap, did did it line by line in that spreadsheet and ran it, dumped the output to a file, read the file, identified the fingerprint, right? Because Nmap could give you a guess at the OS. Then I would go, after the sweep was done of a particular group of, whether by site or by subnet, I'd go back and verify them with the site managers. And so, I think on an idle Tuesday, maybe a Wednesday, I don't remember. I set myself up in the command prompt, ran Nmap, and to go figure out what was on this particular segment, a large IP segment. I remember all the three places on that segment. Anyway, did that, Control Delete, went to lunch, came back to a slightly interesting scene, I would say. Gosh, and it was both horrifying and that moment of, I'm glad I'm not those guys, that quickly turns in, oh my God, that's me. Where, I walk past my boss of the CISO's office, and he's got the glass door with the shades on it. Shades are open. Hear lots of loud talking, lots of people crowded around his conference room table with the speakerphone on. And in the background, I hear the following noise. I'm like, wow, somebody broke something bad. Sucks to be them. And then I sit down at my computer, Control Delete, went to log in, and my machine, I think Windows 2000 or something at the time, had told me, now you're disconnected from the network. So we're going to load a cache copy of your credentials, but you can't access the network. I was like, that's weird. I left and everything was fine. I log in, it lets me in my machine. And I noticed that Nmap had told me that, I started all these timeouts. It's like, well, that's kind of odd. That's very strange. And so I, check out my network card and it just says disconnected. So I look under my desk, and the cable coming out of my machine was fine. The cable coming from the cube wall was fine, but suddenly they were no longer connected. And I thought, well, so I unplug it, pull it out, and I was like, okay, so maybe one of my colleagues, we did this stuff to each other, thought they were hilarious and cut my cable. And like, oh, maybe he won't notice. So I stand up in my cube, because we all sat next to each other. And just then the door of my boss's office swings open. Goes one of these things, right? And I was like, what's going on? I walk into his office and he goes, sit, quiet. I was like, okay. And I'm still hearing bah, 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 in the background. I'm like, what is going on? And he says, okay, well, Raf is here. His was the machine that did this. I was like, well, no, what? And it's been 20 years, so the details aren't perfect. But here's the net. At the site I had just scanned, there were, shall we say, things that required nuclear material to generate power. Okay? The site had some very, very old VMS VAX machines that had been, these giant room-sized servers that were connected into the equipment that kept this thing from being a smoldering hole in the ground for a wasteland for thousands of years. And nobody told me not to scan those. Yeah. You see where this is going? All right. So you basically throw the toolbox at an old VMS VAX machine that had TCP/IP installed on top of it because it was kind of a shim into the operating system. And they segfault core dumped. Not one, because obviously there were two of these things, and how else would you set them up but sequentially in IP addresses?
Of course.
So I nuked the first one, then I nuked the second one.
Nice choice of words there, nuking them.
Just, sometimes things happen. So
sequentially at
that. So that did not happen, but they're all staring at me, and I was like, wait a minute. No. I did exactly what I was asked to do. They're like, we made it explicit that, and so the guy that runs all these sites, and now he's going to have to report to the Nuclear Energy Regulatory Commission, NERC, I think, what exactly was happening. Because apparently, if you lose telemetry at these places, you have to do procedures that take a long time, and it takes even longer to get them restarted. I don't know the exact details behind it, so I'm not going to try to recall that, but I do recall sitting in this at this chair with like 30 people staring at me, accusing eyes and all, and I felt like I'm at least getting fired. I may actually be going to jail today.
Oh yeah, jail time, 100%.
And I'm like, wait, no. I did what they told me. And I said, we made it. And so, the guy that runs the sites, not an IT guy, by the way, he said, well, what the hell do you think? What do you think? I said, well, I was asked to scan all the IP address ranges for NT4. And I'm working with the exclusion list. My boss is like, yep, that's exactly what we were said. He goes, show me that list. So I went back to my desk, hit print, put it in front of him. He goes, all right, what's the site? Yeah, verified it. He goes, were there any things we needed to exclude on that site? And I got really quiet. And the head of the guy that ran all these sites goes, I forgot the guy's name, so I'll use a fake name. Hey, Mike, you sent them. Were there any exclusions? You sent those, right? He goes, yeah, of course I did. He goes, well, can you re-forward that to me? I think it's really quiet for a minute because we're staring at no exclusions on this IP range. And the guy had was just done telling us how brittle these machines were, how nobody, we're not allowed to scan them. And they were off list and all that. And he comes back and he says, I can't find the email. He goes, so did you send it? It's like, I must have sent it. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm not going to jail, but I'm probably still getting fired. And so after significant mailbox searching, it turns out he didn't actually send anything. He forgot to reply. And I had, in fact, devastated both the machines, which take several hours to power back up and re-telemetry sync and all that stuff. But yeah, I pretty sure I needed a change of underpants at least that day. I probably I do vaguely recall walking out of my CISO's office straight to the bathroom and getting very ill because early in your career you're like, oh my God, this is the end of everything, and it was terrifying. And it was one of those like I wonder what's happening over there, and suddenly you realize like you're the feature in the horror movie. And by the features, like you're the person that went down in the basement thinking, I'm not in a horror movie, but you are.
Oh yeah.
And by the way, you're the star. You're the first one getting filleted. Like it's going to be bad.
That's epic. That's epic. Because I don't think I ever made a security mistake that actually set off an alarm system.
It's not just an alarm system.
No, just it shuts down a nuclear facility.
Yeah.
You're worried about a smoke alarm. We're talking about Chernobyl. It's all right.
Fine. Split hairs. By the way, can I make one tiny little observation? Just itty bitty one, just a little tiny off to the corner. That it was 2002 perhaps when NERC put out the new SIP requirements. Was
that the last time they were updated?
That's when they were. that's when somebody goes, maybe we should have a security requirement for our power systems in case somebody scans a VMS. I wonder.
It's not uncommon though. Like we did a test one time at an airport, and it was very clear baggage claim is off limits for that same reason. Like if you scan those systems, like baggage claim is done, so don't do it. Like it's interesting, but I'm curious. Two things that I really pulled out of that, Raf. First, I do remember those days where people go around and to mess with each other. You're literally cutting people's cords. It's messed up. We don't do that anymore. Second,
you can't cut a cord anymore. It's
how many incidents, or maybe I should phrase it this: how nervous are so many people when they kick a scan off and then go leave? Like I used to hate kicking a scan off at night and be like, oh, I'll just go sleep while this is scanning.
No,
and then come back later, or your thing, go to lunch. I come back, like you're not there, that in the event you need to shut that thing down,
So I tell
can't.
you, I never like it didn't cross my mind until that day, and now I've never walked away from the scan since.
Yeah. But I mean, how many people like they scan overnight? They just kick it off. They let it go. I get to. So I had a situation one time, and it wasn't a scanning issue, but I was testing a client doing a web test, and I will tell you this: the app should have been like the OWASP vulnerable app that everybody uses for learning on.
WebGoat.
This thing, it was a cold fusion app.
Oh God.
If it was in OWASP, if it had a CWE, this had it, right? Like the only security this thing had was performance. It was horrible. So, I mean, I remember running SQL map like at night, like to pull data, and literally, I mean, if anybody's ever run SQL map, right? Like it displays it really like faster than you can read it. This thing, you would sit there and like every 2 to 3 seconds, like a new thing would pop up on the screen. And you're like, what is it? Literally took me like 3 nights to get the data that I needed because trying to enumerate these tables. I told him, I was like, you have every vulnerability that's known. I said, but it's so hard to get the data because your systems are so ridiculously slow. Nobody can enumerate it. The good news is they didn't have anything auditing it, so they didn't know you were taking a year to pull all their data. But like, it was the craziest thing. I was like, this is like got to be one of the worst steps I've ever seen.
I am fully secure because I'm so slow. Hackers won't even bother. They don't have time. It's amongst all the bad guys.
I see there's data there, but I'm not willing to take the time to go get it.
Yeah, I'm like, that thing's too damn slow.
That's awful, but also kind of funny.
It's hilarious. Just a little quick sidebar one. It's always fun watching somebody else go through that. And the short version is me and a couple other consultants were at this very large company in their data center. And he was more of the, so I say, the server guy, and we were more the firewall jocks kind of thing. And he's talking about this really massive, I think it was like this giant IBM or HP server. And he was talking about how fancy the RAID system was on it, and that it's hot swappable and stuff like that. Really just talking. And I'm like, and we're freezing to death, obviously. We're like, we just want to get out of here. And we're kind of making fun of him or whatever. I can't remember exactly what was going on, basically egging him on, right? And he goes, so you don't think it's hot swappable, do you? Reaches into the server, this massive server size of a refrigerator, and proceeds to rip a hard drive out of it. And it just stops. The whole thing just stops. And you can watch the lights flicker out. Case by case. He literally shut the whole thing down. And we're like, okay, firewall's working. See ya. We're out of here. So again, not setting off a nuclear disaster alarm level stuff, but it was for him, that's for sure. We affectionately called him Scuzzy after that, by the way.
I had my own run-in with Scuzzy drives. Gosh, I was a consultant, a young consultant for a company out of the Midwest, out of Chicago area, Lombard, Illinois, for I think like 4 weeks. It wasn't IT consulting. It was just general stuff, running backups for large companies, testing drive arrays, that kind of stuff. And it was very strange. We had the company internally was all Microsoft, and this guy named Fritz that ran the company, and he kept like everything he had on the company was in the Exchange server, like everything, billing, customer records, notes. Everything was in that Exchange server because it was, forms, and it was a giant database, right? So he used everything. And I can't remember the other guy's name, but they had to move one of the systems or something. And the way it happened was, this was like on a Thursday or something. They had to move that giant thing, to a different room or something. And somebody bumped that giant, heavy, real thick SCSI cable out the back of the array. So it wasn't bad, and it wasn't like that it was not reading. It was just throwing random write read errors every once in a while because it was like not connected, but not exactly. And I remember coming in on Monday, and it's just sitting at a blue screen of death. and Fritz is freaking out because we don't know what appointments we have that day. Like nothing works. And so I finally see the other guy, like one of our the guy was going to show me around. He was in the server room and he's frantically working, and the boss is just screaming at him. And we're like, boss, move this thing, right? Yeah. He's like, what did you do? How could you have, whatever. He's like, I didn't touch this because all I did was move it. And so they kind of look at the back of it and the cable's like half in, half out. He goes, well, just restore it. He goes, well, the last backup jobs have been running all over the weekend. And the array had so Friday, full, bad. Saturday, Sunday, partial, bad. Monday, failed. So the restore process, how do I put this gently, went back like a month or something. And as they were trying to restore, it was ArcServe, I think was the backup system that they used at the time. It had some weird issue and it just wrecked the entire thing. And so I think he went out of, like, I got fired because they couldn't figure out what to do. I can't remember the guys' names. There was two guys, and then the boss, and then like a lady that ran the front office and was one of the consultants. And like I think the company's been, went out of business shortly after that because that was the one repository. But like it was like it's like a zombie ran because everything was cached. But as soon as you went to go access the array, it just blue screen because it was bad, right? Air quotes. Because they had been writing bad parity data to it, and then it was just dead and it was all gone. And then you're sitting there going, oh my God, your entire business, it was on that array and it's gone. Now what?
And they'd spent an inordinate amount of money setting up that RAID 3.5, whatever you had set up to avoid such a disaster.
It was terrifying. It was so crazy that kind of stuff still happened. But I mean, like it was, be like, oh, it's just, what's the worst that could happen? Your business goes away, right? Small business didn't have a whole lot of, like the guy was super smart with everything Microsoft. Well, I mean, apparently when your data is not readable, doesn't matter how smart you are, you still can't get it. It gone.
It didn't take a ransomware incident or anything like that back in the day, did it? I mean, it just took a cable.
Yeah.
I mean, literally a cable.
Yeah. And I always found it weird that it kept running because the explanation we got from Microsoft at the time, because it was TechNet. Remember TechNet? Where you can actually still call somebody over there and get an answer.
Yeah.
The explanation was that it had cached a whole bunch of stuff in memory. And as long as you were accessing cache data, it was fine. And there was nobody there in the office to do anything. So, all the new email that came over the weekend was just sitting in a cache somewhere. And when you rebooted it, it had to go back to the disk because the cache as it was shutting down, the cache transfer to disk failed, blue screened. And when you came back, well, the disk is bad. There's no cache and you can't boot and everything's gone. And I remember like the despair on that man's face was part disbelief, part despair, part anger. And all I could think of was, serves you right, jackass, for screaming at us when it's something you did.
Yeah. Speaking of old Microsoft, I'll tell you really kind of a funny one where I did something really stupid, but I'll take you back to 1995.
Oh boy.
Windows 3.5.1 was just launched and it was like a big deal for Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
So at the time I was like a pretty big time, not big time, but I was a pretty Microsoft certified guy. I had every certification, you name it, I had it kind of thing, right? Because I thought that was the future of security. Little did I know. And so they selected like, I don't know, it was like maybe 250 people to put on planes and go to Seattle for this giant 3.5.1 workshop. And you walk in and everybody's got a server. At every seat, there's a server sitting there, keyboard, the whole deal. And I was like, whoa, just this giant room, a sea of computers and servers. And we're all there to learn about 3.5.1 and be like the pointy tip of the spear to roll it out and all this kind of stuff. Now, early 90s is when things like Smurf and Papa Smurf and all these other types of silly little DDoS things kind of came out, which were just fun to dork around with. And so after about the second or third day, I was getting kind of bored going through their little point and click, set up this in Active Directory or whatever it was at the time. And I was talking to the, guys next to me kind of thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to bounce your computer kind of thing. And we were kind of doing this bouncing back and forth, the old cut the wire into the desk thing, right? And we're just going after it. Pretty soon, the whole desk, we're just trying to shut down each other's computer and mess up their schemas. We're doing anything we can to blow up these servers, right? Which let's call it duck and duck, right? Wasn't brain surgery. Well, then, so we're like, let's get the guys on the table in front of us. Let's get the guys on the table in back of us. Next thing you know, between three of us, we're creating waves. It was like the wave in a stadium. You could hear people going, blue screen, click, and you could hear the click of the tower rebooting. Remember those days we had to click the power button?
Oh yeah.
And all of a sudden people are standing up looking around like this. So
Nice.
200 and 300 people, a sea of computers standing up, and we're just like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. But yeah, it created like this echo effect. But the thing is all of these, it kind of comes back to our quick little chat before we started hitting record, is that it really, when you think about it, these mistakes that you make and you don't intend to, like leaving a scan or trying to do a password check on something, or just having, you don't really mean anything bad by it. There's just, I think if you've been in security long enough, I arguably IT, but it seems to happen with security because you like block access for so many people on occasion, right? And something goes sideways. There's just all those times where you just gut sinks.
I think IT too, right? I mean,
yeah.
You think about all the stuff you do in operations and development, all that stuff. Like everybody's got these horror stories of stuff that is nothing security related, right? It was just, we deployed this out and it just completely broke everything. I mean, yeah, anybody that sat on a weekend deployment knows exactly about, we did this and it shut everything down and we fought for the next 2 days to get it up before the, workforce comes back on Monday. Like it's all this stuff, but it speaks to the experience, and not to take it down that path, but when you talk about like the shortage, and I'm putting air quotes around it, the skills shortage, like all that, like entry level, these different things.
That's coming up, James.
Like this is all stuff that ties into that idea of, a lot of that stuff, you've learned so much by failing in a lot of times, right? I mean, let me tell you something. I locked all those people out. Like I learned real quick, like I know how a tool works before I run it. And, I can make that, distinction. Do I run that against a prod system? Do I not run it against a prod system? You take those lessons and you bring them in. But if you haven't done that, right, then you're ripe for doing it. The question is, where do you do it? Do you do it at the nuclear site? Or, did you do it at some place where it really didn't have a huge effect on everything, and you're able to learn that lesson and move forward? But I wonder too, I think probably for most of us, right, our stories are from 20 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe. Do we have a lot of stories from the last 10 years? I don't know, maybe, but like, a lot of that stuff is, technology's changed a lot since then. What we could do, it's like listening to my dad talk about, how they used to drive when he was, first being able to drive a car. There was no, one cop in the town, like they did some crazy stuff. You can't do that now, right? Like I couldn't do it growing up. My kids certainly won't be able to do it. Just that stuff changes. So it's interesting to think like tools have gotten better. They have better guardrails, these SCSI systems and, RAID array, like all that stuff. I mean, you don't see a lot of people dealing directly with that anymore. I mean, who's physically going to move in that server in the office these days that's going to kick a wire out?
Yeah, but so this is the part that I think a good place for us to end because we're out of time. But we were touching, I would say, the bare metal. We were touching the lowest end of that technology stack, meaning that we were actually able to plug that wire in, watch the debug, and go, oh, that's a lot of, like, watch dmessage go brrr, as it scrolls SCSI errors, right? In some of these systems, if it was a Linux box, or look at NT log and go, holy cow, there's 10,000 a second write errors. That's probably bad. Nobody looked at that, but it would have been good to look. These days with all the abstraction, right? Cloud and all these abstracted systems, like, do you still see the issues underneath? And I wonder if the next horror story that comes up is that, nobody really knows how the things underneath run, and something down in that lower level breaks, and everybody just stares at each other and goes,
that's the difficulty, right? I mean, things are so much more kind of that black box of how does this all piece together? It's no longer just the server tower sitting there. It's the server tower that's touching 50 other things, or it's your endpoint that's got 25 agents on it that are all doing this thing. And it's like, this isn't working. And to tie that back around to, like, oh, well, the caching, like, it was over the weekend. Nobody was using it. We didn't know. What happens when you have something that hasn't been working for a year, but it's because it's not something nobody touches? And then all of a sudden you touch it, it breaks, and it happens to break right after you did some sort of other change. And you attribute it like, oh my gosh, it must be this change. You roll the change back, doesn't fix it, and you're like, oh my, I don't know what's going on. Why has this been fine for a year? It's been fine for 2 years, and now, but it's not working. But it actually was not fine for 2. You just didn't know.
Yeah. Batch jobs that run every 3 weeks, things that run once every 6 months, reconciliation. Like, we jokingly, a final thought here, we jokingly talk about, these zombie systems. They're kids, they're out there. I mean, they are out there. Was it recently that I read that was it Southwest Airlines that was finally decommissioning some like ancient age Windows or DOS floppy disk based system somewhere? It was some airline. Correct me if I'm wrong, you guys listening. I may have gotten that wrong, but I swear I read something to that effect. It was some airline that was decommissioning a DOS based platform because it was just too much to maintain. If you go back through this podcast, there's a episode way back, I think in the 100s or pre-100, with Jason Whitty, where we talk about, I think it was so think of this as what, 8, 9, 10 years ago. Well, Fox Pro was still running payroll after it had been, officially dead and gone for like a decade, right? I mean, there's technology out there today that is as old as some of you listening, not quite as old as we are because we're old, but it's getting there. And what happens when it goes away? Yikes. But that's for another Halloween. Well, that was fun. Thanks for joining us, you guys.
That was fun. Yeah. Little tour down terror stories.
Yeah, things we did that we wish we wouldn't have. I've got so many of these. I had to go carefully pick through ones that wouldn't incriminate me or by accident or get anybody else in trouble, because there's some stuff that I still can't talk about, or at least I shouldn't.
Yeah, that's for sure.
We all did some things you're like, oh, I'm glad nobody noticed.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, hey, if you're listening to this and you've got a scary story or a lesson learned to tell, feel free to drop by our LinkedIn page and tell us about it. I'd love to hear it. Everybody's got one of these, right? And I wonder what yours is. So, all right, that's Halloween. Get out there with the kiddos and go trick or treat. None of this trunk or treat crap. Go knock on people's doors and scare the hell out of old people, because that's what we do on Halloween. Except those old people are now us. Thanks for listening, you guys. James, Jim, thanks for being on. Thanks for joining me. And this has been another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Thanks for listening. Check us out on YouTube where I post these videos, and we'll see you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.